Did you know on any relatively modern Linux system, anything that's using UEFI, you actually don't need a bootloader, whether that be Grub, systemd, Lamine, or any of them. You can just use festub and boot into the kernel directly. Now, there are still reasons to have a bootloader, and there's a reason why most distros still ship them. Easily dual booting, easily editing boot parameters, easily swapping the kernel you want to boot with. But if all you do is one operating system, one distro, whatever the latest kernel you have is, it mostly just works fine. Because of those drawbacks though, and because you can't really assume what most users are going to be doing, most users still have a bootloader, especially if they're installing a distro like a Fedora, an Ubuntu, even doing something like Arch Linux or Gentoo yourself, you're probably still going to install a bootloader. One, because familiarity. Two, for the flexibility it offers. And whilst there are a lot of options out there, Grub is generally considered the default, the most popular option, and one distro that uses it is Ubuntu Linux. And recently, they announced a change which is somewhat controversial. Streamlining secure boot for 26.10. Not relevant to the post, but I do kind of wish they used a bold font for their title. So, I don't know, whoever's involved in managing that, go do that. From Julian K, Ubuntu system supports secure boot using Grub. Grub contains a lot of parsers for file systems and other things, which are a constant source of security issues. In 26.10, so not the next LTS version, but the version after that, the one that comes out around the end of this year, we'd like to propose removing the following features from signed Grub builds. File systems for the boot directory. Remove Btrfs, HFS+, XFS and ZFS, retain ext4, FAT, and ISO 9660, and SquashFS for snaps. This is not your home or your root. This is specifically the boot partition. So in my case, that would be this one right here. I don't have it mounted because you don't actually need it mounted, but this very small partition that is pretty much only used during the boot process, and you pretty much never directly touch it yourself. Image formats. Remove JPEG and PNG. Retain none. We do not use images, but using that in your Grub CFG locally is a massive security risk, if even still allowed. If you're the kind of person that likes to go and install a Grub theme, rice your Grub, things like this, that would no longer be supported in the build they're using on 26.10, which also includes the Ubuntu flavors, which were using a Grub theme that, even though the main one wasn't, they were. Partition tables. Remove part_Apple, retain part GPT, and part MSOD. This is the Apple partition table. Considering that nobody is doing a Hackintosh nowadays, and you're especially not doing a dual boot Hackintosh, yeah, this was already like a very niche thing. Now that Apple is on their whole Apple Silicon stuff, they're not doing the whole Intel Macs, this was something which was gonna die out slowly over time anyway. In addition to those simpler changes, we will remove support for boot on complex partition setups such as LVM, MD RAID except RAID 1, and Lux encrypted boot. These abilities were inherited by Debian, but never tested in Ubuntu, and the Ubuntu installer always set up a separate bare ext4 partition. My main concern with any changes like this, like the theming stuff, who really cares about that, and these ones also apply the same way. My main concern is anybody who would be migrating. Most people are fine. Most people are going through the regular Ubuntu setup, but if you are running a weird, complicated setup, now you're in a position where you have to ensure that your upgrade path is going to actually be possible. As for encryption in particular, encryption of boot only provided security by obscurity, but not actual security. You want to ensure the integrity of those pieces. Our TPM FTE solution correctly implements integrity in the early boot stage, and we are committed to keep iterating and improve it. Keep in mind, these changes only affect boot. The file system, partition tables, Lux, LVM, RAID solutions continue to work in a booted system. We are not removing them from the Linux kernel. This is specifically about boot. We understand these are controversial options, however, we believe they'd substantially improve security, but also enable pivoting to new boot solutions in the future. The features will continue to be available without secure boot and security support. Security support is only provided for secure boot scenarios, so if you want to keep using these, basically you just have to forego using secure boot. Now, a lot of people on Linux are not using secure boot anyway, so granted, maybe this is not the biggest of deals. The timing here is crucial. By performing the changes directly after an LTS, we can keep affected users on an LTS release with support for 10 years, rather than an interim release with 9 months of support. So being done on 26.10, it's one release after the LTS, so you can stay back on 26.04 and you'll be fine. Also, because it is being done on 26.10, if they want to go and maybe revert the change, they can do that without affecting the LTS release. Now, this change has been a little bit controversial. I don't just mean controversial by people on Twitter. I even mean people who are developers and people who are directly involved in Ubuntu. Not involved in Ubuntu, but is involved in countless Linux projects. Neil Gumper, can we please not drop Butterfs? It's a read-only file system driver that is actively supported by upstream developers. Users who want to leverage boot to snapshot setups with Butterfs need this support. Later in the thread also saying, while this is true regarding someone saying this is only for boot, and from the ArchWiki, Grub doesn't respect the default Butterfs subvolume settings leading to easy breakage and requiring to modify kernel parameters in grub.cfg, you usually use a subvolume for boot so that it isn't snapshotted along with the rest of the system while benefiting from flexible space allocation. There are a multitude of methods for boot to snapshot, including leveraging Grub's BLS support or modules like Grub Butterfs. Someone raises a good point. Have you considered switching to systemd boot instead? It's the minimal bootloader you're looking for, and it integrates into systemd-based systems well anyway. It seems like they're sort of taking Grub and just stripping things back until you effectively get systemd boot, but not taking the jump over to systemd boot. As I said before, some Ubuntu flavors have Grub themes, and I know those use images. I don't think you can yank this since it's something flavor customization relies on. I don't really know the relationship between Ubuntu and its flavors, right? I know Fedora has a pretty healthy relationship with those third-party projects, and oftentimes there is a lot of cooperation between the two. I don't know if that exists within the Ubuntu space to the same sort of extent. If somebody works on an Ubuntu flavor, please do let me know what it's actually like. I think this needs further explanation and a deeper explanation of how this is going to improve security for each dropped item being made in a public explanation of why each bit being dropped is beneficial. Consider 2604 currently and 24.04 LTS or 25.10 flavors. All of the default Ubuntu installers for those have LVM as options, have experimental XFS as selectable option, use Lux plus LVM for encryption. Ubuntu servers default installers also use LVM, and you don't want to have a choice to remove this. You're essentially saying, hey, these defaults we've set, worthless with this decision. In fact, you're hobbling existing installs and policy mandating environments that require the use of encryption with Lux, which currently can only be done with LVM and other setups. I also don't see the reason to drop file system support from Grub signed. It doesn't actually reinforce security, it actually brings a detriment to security because you can't use secure boot if you also use one of these other things in an environment. Especially given that all of these are supported in 2604's roadmap currently, you're effectively going to force everyone to old school installation on physical partitions with VMs, etc., and other needs. LVM is actually useful to facilitate easy expansion and management of disks and expansion of volume arrays across disks without the need of full, I've never actually said this word, I'm going to say M.M. That's what we're going to go with, and software RAID with reinstalls of systems. As a security professional myself and someone who actively uses RAID 5 systems to actually make sure my data doesn't get lost and I can have more than one disk of failover in RAID systems, I want to hear the Foundation team's reason for each removal. If you are unable to provide an ample justification for each removal, then the Foundation team needs to not abandon existing feature sets on the basis that it makes Grub's side more bare and thus more secure because there's less open holes for risks. And as you might have noticed, there is a little canonical icon next to them. They are from the Community Council. This is someone who's involved in a lot of things across Ubuntu, not just a random person. Someone else, this time from Ubuntu members, could you cite these security issues, please? This would be a major change, so I'd like to understand the specifics of the motivation behind it. For example, I'd like to understand the specific security issues we'd have avoided in the past had this change happened earlier, given that these security issues of the past are the sole motivation for this change. Here is a list, this being from a canonical employee, of some of those issues. All of these are pretty much related to various file systems being supported by Grub. I don't know, I might leave the post link down below so I don't have to individually link all of these, but feel free to go and have a look at them for yourself. Also, there is one here about the JPEG parser as well. This is from 2024, a specifically crafted Why did it zoom out when I zoomed it? A specifically crafted JPEG file can cause the JPEG parser of Grub2 to incorrectly check the bounds of its internal buffers, resulting in an out-of-bounds write. The possibility of overwriting sensitive information to bypass secure boot protections is not discarded. The response to that: I don't think these are relevant CVEs for the motivation presented though. If Ubuntu users were in the default configuration not vulnerable, then why is it necessary to remove those features from Ubuntu users who wish to opt into using them? We are not making the majority of users any safer, and the security team will surely still need to continue to issue security updates for the non-signed case. Help me understand the motivation here. What security problem would be solved by doing this? I don't understand your line of argumentation, to be honest. In my opinion, in security critical software, any code that is included by default without being used is a risk without benefit. Not including arbitrary code is the default. Exceptions should need a really good justification. That is why we have things like a main inclusion review with security review, because we don't trust by default. If you want things in main, you have to make a good argument for why it makes sense and why it isn't a liability. Not being used in the default configuration does not mean the security vulnerabilities don't affect you. An attacker might still be able to reach the code by manipulating the environment. A trivial example, you can make Grub parse file systems on any disk it sees. That includes USB drives. If any of the more obscure file system drivers now have a vulnerability that allows hijacking Grub control flow, they can skip signature verification and load whatever they want. Since Grub is signed with the Secure Boot CA, that would be a complete defeat of Secure Boot. You could have easily mitigated it by not including this driver no actual user ever used, since it is not something the installer supports. I am not on the boot team, but I'm pretty certain that fixing CVEs in Secure Boot critical code paths is more involved than regular CVE fixes, because you now also have to revoke this signature or rotate your key. Keep in mind, it defeats Secure Boot on any device that has a trusted chain rooted in the Microsoft third-party CA, because all of them will load our shim, which will load our Grub, which you could then exploit. There is much more work involved than for fixing the CVEs in the unsigned part. Even as of a couple of hours ago, there is still some discussion going on about this change. If this does end up happening, I do expect to see, and I hope to see, at least one official Ubuntu blog post explaining the justification for this change being made, because even Ubuntu community members, even distro maintainers, are really confused about why this is being done. And I understand some of the logic for, oh, get rid of the code path isn't there, the potential for security vulnerability no longer possible. And sure, fair, okay, but what about the flavors that were using it? What about the users who were using it? Do those not matter? Like, at all? Should they just stop using Secure Boot, which you would argue is considerably worse? People are kind of just confused about what's being done here, and that's pretty much how it goes. So, I guess, let me know your thoughts down below. If you liked the video, go like the video. Go subscribe as well, and, yeah. If you really like the video and you want to become one of these amazing people over here, check out the Patreon, subscribe, Daily Bearer Pay, linked in the description down below. Go subscribe, go like as well, and just use Arch Linux, and then, you know, enjoy your life.